This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Aaron Mate.
We turn now to a report that reveals the sharp rise in cross-border shootings by U.S. agents along the Mexico border. A joint investigation by the Washington Monthly and the investigative fund at the Nation Institute has found over the past 5 years, U.S. border agents have shot across the border at least 10 times, killing a total of 6 Mexicans on Mexican soil. The expose is called Over the Line. Investigative reporter John Carlos Frey writes, quote, "The picture that emerges from this investigation is of an agency operating with thousands of poorly trained rookies and failing to provide the kind of transparency, accountability, and clear rules of engagement that Americans routinely expect of law enforcement agencies." One of the victims Frey writes about is Jose Antonio Rodriguez. He was killed last year in the Mexican border town of Nogales as he went out to buy a hot dog. U.S. border agents shot him 8 times. He was 16 years old. Taide Elena Rodriguez was his grandmother and primary caregiver.
Le queda uno mucho coraje, mucha impotencia.
You get really mad. You need a lot of courage. You feel really powerless. So many things go through one's mind that one can't make sense of. For example, all I can picture is my grandson thrown onto the floor. I feel like I'm going to go crazy because I can't understand how somebody could be so evil to kill a child who's not doing anything. He was just walking on the sidewalk. The only thing he did wrong was to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. As I told a reporter, he said to me, "What would be justice for you?" Justice for me is seeing the person or the people who did this in a court in front of a judge sentencing them. That is what I want to see. I don't want anything else. I know that won't bring Antonio back, but that is what I want.
That's Taide Elena Rodriguez, the grandmother and primary caregiver of 16-year-old Jose Antonio Rodriguez, shot by U.S. Border Patrol in Mexico last year. To find out more, we're joined now by investigative reporter John Carlos Frey. His article is called Over the Line. It appeared in the Washington Monthly this week. Welcome to Democracy Now! Tell us more about Jose, but also put this in this bigger context of the number of Mexicans who've been killed as U.S. border guards shoot across the border.
This is a strange and recent phenomenon. We actually have U.S. federal agents who are firing their weapons into a sovereign country. And in the past couple of years, they've actually killed 6 people. They've actually shot 10 times into Mexico, wounding a couple of others. And in some cases, we don't even know what happened. So we're talking about Mexico, our neighbor, our friend to the south, basically receiving arms, bullets from federal agents. And the insidious part of all of this is that the U.S. public knows nothing about this. Elements about the cases, the histories, the details of these incidents are kept from the public. We don't know the agents' names. We don't know why. We don't know anything about the incidents. So I traveled up and down the border talking to as many people as I could for the report.
Tell us some of the stories you learned.
There's one instance in a park where a husband and wife were celebrating the birthday of their 2 daughters. The husband got shot and killed, shot in the heart. This is in Nuevo Laredo. They were across the river, across the Rio Grande in Mexico. And he died in a public park with children and families that were out for a barbecue. Also in South Texas recently, there was a...
Well, let's turn to a clip,
Sure.
One of your clips from the interviews you did with the family members of the victims. Guillermo Arevalo Pedroso was shot dead by U.S. Border Patrol agents September 3rd, 2012, in Nuevo Laredo, as you said. At the time of the shooting, he was grilling fajitas with his wife, Isabel, and their 2 children. This is the interview you did with his wife, Isabel.
When I turned around, I saw that my husband was lying on the floor.
He was sleeping, with his mouth open or closed?
Mouth open. My daughter went over to him and started screaming. She was screaming, "My father, my father." He was bleeding. They killed him.
You weren't throwing rocks? You weren't yelling profanities?
No, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
John Carlos Frey, how is this happening? What are the laws? And what was the accountability after he was killed?
If you ask the U.S. Border Patrol what their protocol is about firing across the U.S.-Mexico border, they won't give you one. So I went to Mexico and I found out that there is an agreement between the two countries where U.S. agents are not allowed to fire into the sovereign country of Mexico. As a matter of fact, they're supposed to contact Mexican officials if there's an incident that emanates from the Mexico side of the border. So as far as I could tell, these cross-border shootings are a violation of protocol as well as peace treaties. We have actual peace treaties with the country of Mexico where we're not supposed to deal with Mexico in an armed sort of a way. What's happening, I believe, is that the agents are poorly trained. The agents shoot first, ask questions later. We also have a policy with the U.S. Federal agents that they can fire their weapons if people throw rocks. So if you throw a rock across the border, you can open fire and kill somebody. Rocks are considered lethal force. If we look at other zones of conflicts around the globe, we've actually brokered deals to try and get rock throwing and lethal force taken out of the system, but we don't do that here at the U.S.-Mexico border. We can actually fire at rock throwers.
The case of Juan Pablo Santillan, he was shot while collecting firewood.
He was about 70 yards away, and that's 210 feet across a river, Rio Grande, in a bank, on a bank collecting firewood for his mother, who was going to cook tamales to sell on the street. He was shot in the heart. Border Patrol agents say that he was armed and tried to fire at them. No gun was ever found on his body or at the scene. Anybody I talked to said the man never owned a gun, never shot a gun. Ballistics tests were done. He had no gunpowder residue on his hands. And it looks like this was just Border Patrol agents out for target practice. This is what I heard from some unnamed sources, that Border Patrol agents actually fired at him for the hell of it.
Reverse it. If Mexican border agents were firing into Texas or Arizona and killing residents there, what would happen?
Well, we know that we've had the National Guard on the U.S.-Mexico border. I think we'd have military forces on the border if federal officers from Mexico shot and killed 6 U.S. citizens in the past 2 years, which is what has happened in Mexico. This would be an international incident, and I don't think that the United States would stand for it.
Now, one case has gone to an appeals court, but it was ruled that because the killing took place on Mexican soil, it's not within U.S. jurisdiction?
Correct. A couple of years ago, a 15-year-old was shot and killed in Juarez, Mexico by a border agent. His name was Sergio Hernandez Guerreca. He was shot in the face and died instantly, and he was standing in Mexico. The family sued the U.S. government for wrongful death, and the case was actually thrown out because he died in Mexico. He has no standing. Mexicans cannot sue in U.S. court if the incident occurred in Mexico. So there's no legal recourse. Basically what we have now is a system where border agents can fire their weapons into Mexico, kill someone, and not suffer any legal repercussions.
Now, President Obama was just in Mexico. The debate around immigration is raging now. The legislation that is being introduced calls for thousands more border guards. Talk about the significance of this for what you're finding.
What I've found in this particular investigation is one of the reasons this is happening is because we have poorly trained guards. In 2006 and 2007, we hired about 8,000 more, lowered standards. And we have a lot of rookies on the force now, and they're basically taught to shoot their weapons. If we increase the Border Patrol force by thousands more, as you say, increase militarization at the border, I think we're going to have more incidents here. We're talking about dealing with immigration or immigrants in a militaristic way as opposed to in a human way. And what we're seeing now is the result of using guns instead of diplomacy. And I suspect, since we've seen such an increase in the past couple of years, that this is going to escalate.
The Senate immigration plan is centered around securing the border as a condition for granting a path to citizenship for all these undocumented workers. So do you see that as a case of concern?
It's a terrible case of concern. We have actual large U.S. cities along the U.S.-Mexico border that are becoming militarized. San Diego, El Paso, Nuevo Laredo, Nogales, who have drones flying around in their backyards. They have border guards that are running up and down the border all over the place. We have thousands of armed-to-the-teeth guards that are aiming their weapons at Mexico. So it feels like a war zone down there, and I think it's going to get a little bit worse.
The response of the authorities as you did this piece?
you're suspecting that there is a response. Every time I've tried to get responses from authorities, any sort of information, documents, any sort of answers to the questions that I had, I've been met with mute responses. There are no responses. These cases are locked down. I don't know the names of the agents. I don't know why this has happened. In many of these cases, there's actual video. Video cameras are up and down the U.S.-Mexico border. That video is not available to the public. So these cases have been shut down and closed, not just for months. Even after the investigations have concluded, we still don't get the information.
John Carlos Frey, I want to thank you very much for being here and for this important report. Investigative reporter working on behalf of the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute. His latest piece, called Over the Line, appeared Monday in the Washington Monthly. We'll link to it at Democracy